Okay, guys, moving on to chapter 4. So, when you think about theater, we have a very classic symbol for theater. It's the smiling face and the sad face. Those represent tragedy and comedy, which are your two most common forms of theater. And we're going to discuss those today. So, jumping right in, we're going to get into the tragedy. Okay, it's kind of intuitive. So, think sad things. This chapter makes a lot of reference to Greek theater. I think this text in particular kind of assumes that you know about Greek theater, Oedipus Rex, Medea, Antigone, and especially Death of a Salesman makes a lot of references to that. So um, I hate to assume that you know about these things, so I'm going to kind of talk it through a little bit. If you're not familiar with Death of a Salesman, it follows this character Willy Loman, and it's literally just about the fact that this poor man has worked his entire life. And it's all just sort of falling apart. It used to be very much that you work for so long and then the company will take care of you. We know that's not the situation anymore today. And that's kind of what he was faced with there, the idea of a simple life and where's the payoff at the end. So, but we're going to talk about classical tragedy. So think about Greek long ago, they like to be entertained. Stories of a big level. So that usually involved kings, queens, emperors, and gods. So you would see these things happen, and it would awe and inspire and entertain. However, it was really more about, oh, these people who are in charge, the rulers, as it were, have heavy responsibilities. So we need to, appreciate them and so forth. The modern tragedy takes it a very different way, and we're looking at the everyday man a little bit more. So audiences today should be able to connect in a more real way with tragedy that we're seeing now. So the ability that it affects you and you can relate to it is more of what makes it a modern tragedy versus a classical tragedy. It's probably one of the easiest ways to kind of differentiate between the two. Okay, looking more into the definition, um, tragedy is an imitation of an action that is serious, complete, and of a certain magnitude. That is the definition we're looking at. So, imitation of action. Plays are acted out. They have actors, they're telling the story. Pretty easy. Serious and complete. They're usually dealing with death and life. Okay, those are the two most serious things, right? And those are usually going to be seen when it comes to tragedy. There's some sort of jeopardy or conflict that deals with these two things. Um, and again, that magnitude, the level, you do need to have a level of understanding and a willingness and intelligence to be able to go there, as it were, to comprehend. Some of the things about education is just that ability to understand things from other people's perspective and be able to put things into a holistic understanding. And that's what that whole magnitude is really about. Language embellishment uses dramatic and poetic devices, metaphor, simile, like an Antigone that I brought up before. So, for instance, in Death of a Salesman, Willy Loman tells his sons that the woods are on fire. And if you are an audience member, like, is he talking about something that's happening outside his house? Can he see something through the window? No, when he's saying the woods are on fire, he's talking about his own life. So there's that intelligence, that simile, that metaphor, that ability to see more than just what the language is telling you and understand that it has a bigger meaning. Form of action, the action is the plot of the play, not of narrative. So you're not going to see in a tragedy usually a narrator. Now, think about Romeo and Juliet. The very first thing you hear or see in Romeo and Juliet is always the narrator. Okay, so there is a narrator in that sense that lays out the groundwork, but you're not seeing that narration throughout the course of the entire production. It kind of comes back to, I love this pity and fear. Those two things are going to intertwine. Either I see what's happening and I pity it because I don't quite relate to it, or I can't emotionally go there and relate to it, or fear. I do relate to it. This could happen to me and I'm fearful of it. But why? Why put ourselves out there? Who wants to be sad? That leads to the catharsis. So if you ever just wanted or needed to cry and it finally happens, and after you're done crying, you feel better. I don't know if you're familiar with Pixar's Inside Out. It's a wonderful film. Really helped my family when we were moving, where my kids and I would just sit together and allow ourselves just to be sad. And it was amazing because usually a minute would do us. Just a minute of just crying and being sad, and then we were fine. We could get on and focus on the happy things about our move and the new adventures that it would bring. So there's a catharsis in allowing yourself to give into those emotions. And the chapter goes on to talk about the purgation. Great, this is fascinating stuff right here, about how those feelings can cleanse and teach and make us stronger. So it moves on to the three different kinds here of tragic heroes. So these are people who have an identity or a destiny going on, the protagonist, if you will. Something's happening to them. You've got the idea of a tragic fate. So situation that's irreversible, and it's going to happen, and the acceptance of responsibility. Now, I'll use Titanic for this, right? Titanic, we all know. I remember I went to a midnight showing when they brought it back out, and there was this 7-year-old in this midnight showing with another group. Obviously, I didn't bring my kid, but the 7-year-old goes, "Is the boat gonna sink?" And I'm just sitting there like, okay, number one, you had this young kid out this late at night. Number two, you didn't even tell them that this is a tragedy. Like, the boat's going down. So you've got your tragic heroes. You know everybody walking on there is gonna die. Okay, so Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio's characters are gonna die. They are the hero and the heroine. There is a tragic fate. Okay, we assume they're probably both dying. Certainly, almost everybody on the boat. And then the acceptance of responsibility and the fact that we're watching this, knowing there's not enough lifeboats and there's too much belief in the boat itself, what we have created, that it's better than God or circumstances or nature, that it can beat anything because humans created it. That responsibility of making ourselves God, and not being prepared to handle bad situations. So that's the tragedy maybe of Titanic and how it relates to that. So the language of tragedy, tragic verse. Again, we talked about language, how things can mean other things, and having the intelligence to be able to process that. This goes into a little bit more about modern comedy. Now we're talking about modern tragedy, and it moves into the comedy piece here. Whew, we're into comedy, yay. To provoke amusement or laughter. Love myself some good comedy. And it kind of goes into the elements about it, breaks it down. The suspension of natural laws, they don't necessarily have any place here. Where people can get hit by a car, and they just bounce away, like silly things like that, it's not normal. It's not the way it would really be, but we can laugh at it. Incongruity, where, two things just don't mix, but yet here we are, and that's what makes it funny. The more opposing two things are, the funnier they're going to be. So let's see. Forms of comedy that we talk about. Okay, farce, exaggerated, broad humor. Think Monty Python, or if that's too old for you, think about Elf. Okay, we take this extreme situation of Elf, this adult who's got this magical Santa Claus complex, and that it's real, and then he comes into the human normal world, and his overabundance of Christmas spirit compared to what normal people deal with at the Christmas season is what makes it so funny. That crazy imbalance. Burlesque, I just can't think of a better example to give you than Saturday Night Live. I love Saturday Night Live, but low comedy, crude comedy. There's plenty of that out there. Ted is good. Yeah, satire. Okay, so this is wit, irony, exaggeration to expose or attack an evil or a foolishness. Some examples of that might be Don't Look Up. That's probably one of the newest ones that's out there. That is definitely a satire, definitely with a message. You've got things like even The Simpsons or Family Guy. Those episodes, very pointed. They usually are they're funny, but they're making a point. So that's satire. Okay, domestic comedy, kind of self-explanatory. You're talking about a family, a lot of sitcoms like this. We saw a lot of this in the 90s, with Full House and Family Matters, and Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Domestic situations making sitcoms. Comedy of manners. Okay, so think Downton Abbey, right? I mean, that's probably one of the best ones we like right now. There's lots of good funny stuff in there. You've got the upper class and the lower class. And breaking those rules. Actually, Jane Austen is a great example of that. She took her society and seriously made fun of it. That's why she was popular then. That's why she stays popular now. Comedy of ideas. Okay, so think John Daly, Stephen Colbert. They again have, it's a point. They're making a point about things. Kind of takes you back again to the Simpsons and Family Guy there. To some extent, even South Park. You could make an argument for that. Other forms of theater, Heroic drama, we've talked about that. You know, you've got, you know, like superheroes, that sort of thing. Melodrama, we've done a couple of those here at the Harbor Playhouse. They're popular because they're interactive. You've got music interacting with the drama. Usually the audience has popcorn and they'll throw the popcorn at the actors. Very simple plots, easily recognizable cliche characters. So domestic or bourgeois drama, kind of talked a little bit about that already. And then the tragic comedy. I think a good example of this is probably Adam Sandler's Click, the one where he has a remote control and he can fast forward his life. It's hilarious. There's so many funny moments in there. But in the end, the remote starts memorizing his preferences and the things that he likes to skip, and he becomes a robot through his entire life and misses the whole thing. Oh my gosh, my kids and I both cry watching that. But that is a good example of a tragic comedy. There's new forms of theater, absurd theater. This gives an example about a show in which the characters are slowly becoming rhinoceros, and one refuses. But it's absurd. But there's a lot of things that you can draw that back to about society at large, and we can sometimes be sheep and accept the absurd. Postmodern theater is a combination of different kinds of theater put together, kind of a catch-all, if you will. So that is chapter 4. Take you over here. You got your quiz. Don't forget your assignment right here. Get that all turned into me. And that's comedy and tragedy. Some examples. I bring it back a lot. I know a lot to movies. I'm also quite a nerd, so you're going to be hearing a lot more of that sort of thing as we go forward. But hopefully, it'll make this text a little bit more relatable than just the Greek dramas that maybe you don't love. All right, you guys take care.